Okay, good morning. We're in Ayin Beis, Volume 2. Good morning. We're in Ayin Beis, Volume 2. Page 1153. It's actually right in the middle of Rosh Hashanah discussion, because this is a Rosh Hashanah Maimer, Tafrei Ayin Vav, delivered. This would be the last Rosh Hashanah that they would be in Lubavitch. The Rebbe Rashab would leave shortly after Tishrei, middle of Cheshvan. So let's just sum up where we are. Okay. So the general theme is the Yesh, Ayin, and Yesh. And the Ayin is the mamutza, the interface that connects. The Ayin itself breaks into two, divides into two. One that relates to the source, one that relates to existence. And we learned how they have different meanings in that context. In relation to the source, it means it's not tefes makim. It's insignificant, completely bottled, completely nullified compared to the etzem, the yesh hamiti. The ayin, the yesh hanivra, is you can't interpret that way. So you interpret it. It means two things. He said, it doesn't have substance. It's leidover. It's not made of the same matter that this world is made of, that existence is made of. So it's an ayin, in contrast to a yesh. And the second thing is ein musik. It's not comprehensible to us. It's a mystery. It's beyond us. And yet there's still a relationship because it's the ayin of the yesh hanivra. So you can't call it ayin mamish, as if it's completely nullified, because it is the force, the divine energy, that the creative energy that is invested and is immersed and internalized in existence, except it's beyond us, it's concealed from us. And our avoid is to reveal it. So that led us into a discussion of first the Rosh Hashanah, the revealing of it, the Yedek Kopal, that we ask for and we work toward trying to have some experience, comprehension, or even further seeing as it'll be in the future. That's ayin. But as far as the process of creation goes, it's concealed. And that's why Binyan HaMalchus is from Gvuras. I'm just summing up the page 1152. Gvuresecha yedaberu. Kved malchuscha yemeru. V'gvuresecha yedaberu. So they're speaking about the glory of his kingship and his gvura, which he refers to as the tzimtzumim, the concealment. The 5 gvuras of Zoh that conceals the divine energy so Malchus can emerge, and the Malchus itself, that Malchus further diminishes it so the Yesh can emerge. So the Yesh can be created, the Yesh of Biyah. So the Ayin is concealed, and that's what Gvura Sech. Then the Rebbe Rashab went, and that's the two things that Malchus says, Kiruv and Richuk. Okay. Because Malchus does associate to existence, except it also remains removed and above. Then he went to the second half. The second half of the verse of the pasuk is Leidia lebnei Adam. One second, before we get there, more important point. And he then came back to the two deists, Das Elyon and Das Tachten. Das Elyon and Das Tachten are these two perspectives. The ayin of the Yesh Hamiti is from Das Elyon's perspective, where the Yesh is above and the ayin is below, because the real Yesh, the real existence, true reality is as the Yesh Hamiti. And the ayin Hamiti is therefore the completely bottled. That's the first Das Elyon. Das Tachten is the perspective from below, where the Yesh is below and the ayin is above, meaning above us, for the two reasons we've explained, which as he explains here is kiruv and richuk, two aspects to the ayin. One of that's completely different. It's not of the empirical reality of existence as we know it, And number two, it's unknowable or incomprehensible. Okay. Then he went into the second half of the pasuk. After he says, Kved Malchus Chiyameru, which is the malachim, essentially, the celestial bodies are praising God. He says, this is Lehedia Lebnei Adam. This is to inform and let the human race, the human being know, Hedia, that what? Gvuresov, the Kved Hadar Malchusei. To know God's Gvura and Kved Hadar Malchusei, the glory of the splendor of his kingship. So now he explained what's the Gvura said here, Gvuresov here, second time Gvuresov. He says this Gvuras is Bina. The Hey Gvuras of Bina, their role is not to conceal, their role is to sweeten and soften the Gvuras. Basically, it's to reveal the deeper light within the Gvura. That's what Bina does. Yamalal, he brought Yamalal from the word softening. Yamalal Gvuras Hashem from the Zohar. Okay, so that's Bina. And why is that the case? Because Moichin in general is Chesed V'Rachamim. It's far more compassionate and kind, and primarily because Atik radiates in Bina. So all this causes, and that's Bina is Kodesh Kadoshim, Kodesh HaKadoshim. It includes all three, Kodesh and Kadoshim. So the Bina therefore has that power to be Mamtik HaGvuras the Malchus. Misham Nimshach B'Malchus Lahamtik HaGvuras the Malchus. So essentially what we've established here that in Malchus there's two stages. One is the Gvuras to conceal that there should be a Yesh, the creation of a Yesh. And the second is the sweetening or the softening of the Gvuras of Malchus. We haven't finished the topic, but clearly this is going to be a central theme of Rosh Hashanah. And that's why it says afterwards, V'kved hadar malchusei, Pirush hadar malchusei, li'ez gili ha-melucha. So you could have the helm of the Meluch. You could have basically how the Melech is concealed from and above existence. And then he's teaching Hadar from the word splendor that there's a revelation. The first half of the pasuk, you don't have that. First half, it says Kved Malchusei. Here it says Kved Hadar Malchusei. So he's being medayik. So just like the Gvuras here are from Bina, which is the softening of the Gvuras. In other words, it's more of a revelatory experience. Same thing with the Hadar Malchusei. That's where we stopped. So we're going to continue now. Now, as I said, it's very clear, even though this is helping us understand Yesh, Ayin, and the relationship. Remember, there's the relationship of the concealment of the Ayin from the Yesh, Ayin, the Yesh HaNivra, the created Yesh, and then there's the revelation that's through Aveda. Or what he said, B'chinas Kiruv, that on one hand, the creative force is beyond us completely, like from a distance, because to create something, the creative force is not, the creation has no relationship with the creative force. On the other hand, God took his creative force, and in the process, not the pure state of the force, of the creation, the process is b'chinas kiruv, kayach hapoel b'nifel, that the power of the divine enters within the producer, enters within the product, within the creation. So there's the two sides. We've already been learning it. So now, clearly, he's bringing it far more to a Malchus discussion, which the most obvious reason is because it's a Rosh Hashanah Maimer, and this is the conclusion of the Maimer. But at the same time, it's adding Havana, and this is not the end of the Maimer yet. The end is still later to come by the new paragraph. So let's continue here and see what he says. So since we're still basking in the glory of Rosh Hashanah, it's very fitting, because Binyan HaMalchus, as you know, is Rosh Hashanah, but it continues to build until Yom Kippur. That's the 10, Estimate Shuva is the 10 spheres of Malchus. Binyan HaMalchus in these days. Okay. Va'inyan hu. Okay. The inyan in this is the Hinei Gvuresov. The Gvuresov we're talking about here now is what? The Gvuresov, the second half of the pasuk. The softened Gvuras. The softening of it. He says, Hu inyan Gvura v'keach. Gvuresov is referring to God's power. So Gvura v'keach is his strength and his power. V'agvura hu biyamin. And here's the interesting twist. We usually say Gvura is on the left, but strength, from a halachic dika point of view, is the right hand. We're talking about right-handed people, which is the majority. So when you say by Eibus to Yad Yamin, you're saying that's his stronger hand. So you see here that even though Gvura generally is placed on the left side, there's an element of Gvura that's Yamin, that Dafka, the right side, has more strength. We'll explain the distinction shortly, but that's what he's saying right now. So there's the element of Gvura Biyamin, Dafka, the stronger arm. V'zeu b'chinas ha'gvura is the ima. That's the reason, because it's gvuras of ima. So even though also ima is also on the left, but as I explained, it's on the left because it has an element of smell of the left side. But when we're talking about an ima and here gvuras of ima, we're talking about a certain intensity that's there, that's not focused on the concealment and the severities of gvura. It's talking more about the softening and the revelation of gvura. So even though you may not have learned this, in Chassidus it talks about in Gvura two aspects. There's sometimes the Gvura is obviously Gvura Vidin. Gvura Vidin is referring to concealment, discipline, severities. But then there's Chassidus brings in the Siddur, the Mitler Rebbe, and other places, Gvura from the word Tagbeirus Hachayis, intensity. It's a very different type of meaning. What is intensity? That when you need to put on a lot of strength, so you need Gvura. It's like Tagbeirus Hachayis. Now, of course, it seems to be somewhat contradictory because Gvura as Tzimtzum is like concealing. So in some places it says that actually, in order to conceal, you need to have more intensity. But here, the pshat really here is, if you remember, the whole theme, especially the last 100 pages, has been Tzimtzum B'Shvil Hagilui. The purpose of concealment is not concealment. The reason Malchus needs to conceal the ayin from the yesh, and like we learned earlier, is because if not that, there wouldn't be the kavana. Kavana is there should be a yesh and mitzias. You want to have an independent entity. So you have to have concealment. But the concealment is not an end in itself. It has a purpose. The purpose of the concealment is actually revelation. It's a concealment in order to bring gilui. So you can say, therefore, that the gvura of the tzimtzum has two sides to it. There's the actual gvura of concealment, which is the gvuras of malchus, the gvuras of zah that create the helm of malchus. And the other side is the gvuras of ima, which is the purpose of the gvura, which is really the process of revealing, softening, and revealing the deeper element of what was the meaning behind the tzimtzum in the first place. And that's b'shvil hagili. And that's the second half of it. So now he's going, of course, after he spoke about the gvuras of zah that create the helm, the ayin is concealed from the yesh. Now we're talking about the softening of it and the sweetening of it, which is through bina and kved hadar, the gili that comes through, the gili basically of the ayin within the yesh. Okay. So he says, gvuras le'ima shehem b'chinas yamin, v'hu b'chinas hakeach. It's in yamin, meaning keach here as in power. Talking about power now. Power doesn't necessarily mean concealment. So there's an element in gvura that's concealment, but he's talking about the power and intensity of gvura. Ubchinas gvura v'keach. Ubchinas gvura v'keach. Zeh yesh gam b'bchinas malchus. So now he's saying, though we said earlier.
Do you call it tikberes hachasadim?
Let me finish the whole thing, and I think it'll be completely clear. If you don't mind, let me read the whole thing instead of stopping. I'll read the whole picture, and then if you have any questions, I'll be happy to explain. So he says like this now. Even though we said before that Malchus is about concealment, remember he said, Gvuresecha yidaberu, and yidibur, even though he didn't say it here, but dibur is Malchus. So he said, why? Because you need to have the creation of Metzias, where he said, so now he's saying this second element of Gvura, which is intensity and strength that comes from Bina, is also in Malchus. This too is in Malchus. So it's not just in Bina. Malchus also has this element. For who Hayisav is the Malchus b'chinas yesh ma'ayin. And where do you see it in Malchus? Before we said Malchus conceals. It conceals the ayin from the yesh. If you look before, middle of the last page, it said Mechal Simsum Amir Ta'ebdesh Yuchlis Makal Yesh. U'kmoy came b'chinas Malchus Gufa. I'm reading from last page. Shemalemes as a shelo yizgala ala nivra. That it should not be revealed. And that's why the ayin remains removed, concealed, built in musik. So where do you see the element of power in Malchus? So he says this is the power of creation itself. Malchus carries the koyach ha'atzmus of Bria, like he explains in the Geras HaKedesh, Simon Chof. Doesn't say it explicitly here, but he said it earlier. What do we learn? That, where do you see it? Well, who hisav is the Malchus? Malchus has the power. Malchus is like earth. Dafka earth, not heaven. You can plant seeds and it will give birth to things. So you see that land, even though it's lowest level, Malchus is the lowest level of the spheres, but no sphere of the 10 spheres can give birth to something. Chachma, Bina, Das, Chesed, Gvura, Teferes, Netzach, Yesed, don't give birth. It's Dafka the Nukva. It's the womb of the mother, which is Malchus, that gives birth physically and also spiritually, because Malchus is the creative force of the Koyach HaAtzmus, is going to say, is embedded in Malchus, like it is in earth. It says, this ability to create yesh ma'ayin. Remember, yesh cannot come from the ayin direct. All the spiritual levels, as much as you diminish them, they don't create. The ayin is only the process through which it's created. So where's the creation power come from? Dafke b'keyecha ein sof akol yachol. Only Atzmus. It goes keyecha ein sof. The keyecha of ein sof, the kol yachol that can do anything, has the power. And that's like we say, Ata Giber le'elam. Adnai. Ata Giber le'elam Adnai. Le'elam here is teaching, not that you're forever a Giber, but a Giber le'elam to create elam. So in other words, it comes Ata, Dafka Ata. Giber has the power to create. Nothing else has the power to create. When we say, for example, Seichel creates Midas, gives birth to Midas, doesn't really give, Midas have a root before the Seichel, have a root that's separate of Seichel. They give birth in the sense that they actualize it. But true birthing of Biyah, basically of a Nivra, comes from the Koyach HaEin Sof, which manifests in Malchus. So even though the seed does come from the Zachar, from Zah, all the way from Chachma and Bina, but the actual birthing is in the earth. In this case, the womb, Malchus, like he explains, if you go to Geras HaKedesh 20, that the Alter Rebbe wrote just before he passed away, explains it more at length. So he's there, you see. So we see that Malchus has Gvura V'Keach, not just Tzimtzum, not just concealment that the ayin should be concealed from the yesh, but the actual power of creation that we just said, the yamin, that's talking with a strong arm, meaning with the strength and intensity, Malchus carries that power of creation in it. Okay. Ulechein b'posuk Bereishis, and that's why in the posuk Bereishis, the first verse in the Torah says Bereishis bara l'kim es hashamayim v'sa'aretz. So he says in that verse there's 28 yesh chof ches esius. It's 28 letters. Koyach. So from Bereishis to all the way to hashamayim v'sa'aretz, you have 28 letters. You can count it if you like. Bereishis bara l'kim es hashamayim v'sa'aretz is 28 letters. What's the koyach? What's 28 represent? For inyan koyach maisov. It says koyach maisov higid la'ame. Rashi brings it. Koyach maisov, the power of his creation or the power of his actions. In this case, koyach to create. Koyach maisov higid la'ame. The power that koyach maisov he informed that higid he related to his nation. But here the focus is not on higid la'ame. It's a koyach. So Bereishis, since it reflects the power to create, it has the word koyach in it. Ukamishna Kosov. What's the raya here? Meichin harim bekeche. I guess it means he's using proof from this Meichin harim that he mountains. Meichin would mean lift here, or Meichin means prepares. Not sure.
Prepares, like a chone.
Right, Meichin prepares mountains with his power. In other words, but it means how he created the mountains. He essentially made the mountains with his bekeche, with his strength. So you see here, keche used in the context of power and strength, not in context of severity and concealment and din. And this is what they say, the first half, that they will speak about the gvuresechi, your strengths. They speak about your strengths. What are they talking about? What gvura? The creation of the yesh. I was about to ask, didn't he say before there it was about concealment? He says, but when they say it, the malachim rak shezeh b'chinas helen. When they say it, it's in a form of concealment. They're also talking about the creation of the yesh, but they're focusing on how do you create the yesh by concealing your energy. Ach, oid yesh gvur el yena lishlet ala teva. So he's going back again, the two elements in gvura v'keach. One is concealment. He says there's another gvura el yena, a higher gvura, which is obviously the gvuras of ima, of bina. Lishlet ala teva, that has the power to control, to govern, to dominate over nature. Hanimshach mekeach ma'aseh bereishis l'shanis hateva. So it's like yesh gvur el yena lishlet ala teva hanimshach mekeach ma'aseh bereishis. What is nimshach? The teva is nimshach mekeach ma'aseh bereishis l'shanis hateva. Okay. Let me explain, because it's very bekitzer here. Bereshis bara Elokim Shemayim v'Saaretz, you can teach simply, the way Chassidus usually teaches it. Elokim, remember we teach Bereshis bara Elokim, not Havaya. Why? I think the Frierdiker Rebbe in Tzadik Dalet, because the world was created with din, Elokim, midas hadin, tzimtzum. So there the focus is on, yes, there's koyach, it's still 28 aces, but the focus is there. You created the world with your strength, which means, yes, the strength to create, but with the emphasis on the concealment. Then he says there's another element in koyach, in gvura, and that is the power of Elokus, the power of the Eibishter. So on one hand, yes, it's creation of nature. The other is his power to dominate over nature. And that also that's a gvura el yena, that's a higher level of gvura, where we're focusing not on the concealment and the tzimtzum, but on gilui hakoyach, which means the power of creation, the enormous power to create. Here he's teaching it the enormous power to control and govern over nature that was created by Ma'aseh Bereishis. L'shanis hateva, to change nature. Why is bringing change of nature? I guess he wants to say that there's the element where God creates nature, and that also has gvura. But then it comes as a greater strength that has the ability to change the nature. Because remember, yesh and ayin, on a natural level, meaning initially when it's created, the yesh is, the ayin is concealed from the yesh. So concealment is the main focus there. But the fact is, we have the power to go beyond that. Like we said before, the Yeda Kol Pol, you can reveal the ayin. So he's saying here that this second level of gvura, which Bina introduces, Le'edia lebnei Adam, is the power to overpower the concealment, which of course is somewhat the theme of Ayin Beis, that the tzimtzum was created by God's gvura and koyach, and then we have the power to override it, not override it, to transform it. And that is a higher power even. Now, he doesn't say it here explicitly, but sometimes in my Morim it brings, in Tafresh Pei Hey, in other places, is a Mayim B'yem Hasheni. It says, G'dei l'maisa tzadikim l'maisa shemayim v'aretz. that the Beis of tzaddikim, the actions of the righteous, is greater than the creation. And the question, of course, is how could you say that? Nothing is greater than creation. It's koyach ein sof to create. So he explains there in a number of places because the Eibishter creates yesh ma'ayin, and the tzaddikim make from yesh to ayin, and that's deeper. To create yesh ma'ayin, yes, it's a chiddush. Only God can do that, but that we can come tzaddikim, obviously with the power that the Eibishter gives us, that we can come, humans, tzaddikim, can come and take the yesh that God created and turn it back into ayin, meaning bittul, through elevating it, is greater than the yesh ma'ayin that God created. That's what it says, which comes to explain this a bit. So you see there's two gvuras here. There's the gvura of creation, basically creating the yesh, and then there's the gvura of softening the gvura. Then there's the strength of softening and revealing and elevating, which is much more the focus on intensity and the strength. So in the koyach ha'isavos, you can say there's the power of creation. If you're talking about the element of concealment, that's lehedia, not lehedia. That's gvuresechi daberu. They're talking about the strength, the power of God to create with a focus on the concealment. In order to have a yesh, you need concealment. And the second half of the verse, lehedia lebnei adam, as Gvuresov, is referring to the bnei adam, the work of bnei adam, telling us that there's a greater gvura that has the power to overpower the Helam and Simtsum and reveal something greater and higher. That's essentially what he's saying in brief, just to make it a little explainable, because if not, it seems like contradicting itself. So Bereshis has both, in truth. It has the element of Tzimtzum, but also has the element of the koyach, the strength that to reveal the divine power in creation. Now, the truth is, if you think about it, ability to create a Tzimtzum needs a lot of koyach. In some places it says that the koyach to create Tzimtzum is stronger than the koyach to create Oir. Because Oir is a natural flow of divine consciousness, divine revelation. To override that, to be able to conceal divine revelation needs deeper strength. The example given for a smart person to be quiet takes more energy than for him to speak. Restraint and concealment takes more energy than revelation from the so-called kavyachol. So the tzimtzum too comes from a great power, but ultimately it's tzimtzum b'shvil hagilui, as I said. So therefore, you have basically two elements in it. Okay. Now all this is very bekitzer here. So now the Rebbe Rashab goes on. Look at this. So we have the Chavches Esis of Bereshis as in power, and then there's a state of concealment. Then it says there's a higher Gvurei law. V'zehu Chavches Esis shebe posuk v'yidaber lekim degabe aseres hadibris. So another, the posuk v'yidaber lekim is called advarim me'ela, is also the beginning of the aseres hadibris is also 28 letters. So you have here the Bereshis 28 letters, and you have Veidaber, the first pasuk of the Aseres Hadibros says 28 letters. I just want to point out, initially, he brought the proof from Bereshis. I may have explained it a bit wrong, but no, I don't think so. No. Because he began, I was just thinking that 1 second, Bereshis therefore talks about creation where there's concealment, the Gvura. And Vayedaber Hashem by Matan Torah is revelation. But he didn't say that. He said, he also spoke about the power. He only qualified that in Bereshis, you also have the concealment because of that's all that he said here. But basically, you have both elements. But where do you really see the Gvura Elyena to dominate over nature? You don't say that. You don't see that in Bereshis. Because Bereshis is the creation of existence, the creation of the creative of the physical order, the order, the natural order, I should say, the natural order. But now in the Matan Torah by Daber Lekim is called Advarim by Aseres Hadibros, you have Chavches, and he says, what is this inyan? Hu inyan mashakosav ata yigel no koyach adnai. Okay. Again, everything here is very brief, and you really need to rely on knowing other Maimorim. So let me explain. So Vayatu Yidl no Koyach Adnai is a posuk in Shlach. And that's where the Maraglim they came with all their complaints. Ata Yigdal no Koyach Adnai is an interesting expression. And now, may the Koyach of the Eibishter Yigdal no, please overpower Yigdal no Koyach Adnai. That means it's an additional strength that was being invoked to override their challenge and whatever was happening there, because in a sense, the Meraglim were going al piteva. We can't control, Eretz Echel Shishva, it's a land that consumes its inhabitants, and we can't enter. And who said that to Yigdal? Kolev or Yeshua, or both of them? I think, Al Kapon, V'ata Yigdal no Koyach means a Yigdal, an even more greater intensity. He's bringing proof that there's a Gvura El Yena Yeser. And this is the power of Koyach Adnai.
Moshe is saying that to the Eibishter.
Moshe, right. U'kamoishe Kosov, like it says in the Pasuk, V'achochem toiz l'chochem yeser masor shlitim shebeir. So I think it's a Mishlei. It says wisdom is a support and gives strength to the chochem, to the wise person, more than 10 governors or 10 law enforcers. Shalitim is really governors, leaders. Shebeir. So it's an interesting expression. It's trying to point out that you can have people who have actual physical power, the ones that say they control the city. So the 10 shalitim are the 10 controlling forces, so to speak. How do you say shalit is a governor, a authority, 10 authorities, if you wish. But chachma, he says, for a chacham is what gives him strength. Huh?
Ruler. Shalit.
Rulers, yeah. Rulers, good. So for a chacham, his wisdom is more powerful for him than 10 rulers in a city. So the question is, what's this diuk 10 rulers? So Chassidus teaches like this. It's going to teach. We learned this a number of times actually in Ayin Beis. Shehin Hasara Maimoris. He's going to explain how Chacham is the higher level of Gvura, Koyach, stronger than the Koyach of existence in nature. So again, remember, we're talking about two levels of Gvuras here. Gvura as it's connected to the existence, which is concealment more, and Gvura as it's connected to Atu Yigdal na Koyach Adnai, Dabar Elikim, that is more power, that's the power of intensity. So he says, here's how you teach. Who's the Esher Shlitim Shebeir? Asara Shlitim Shebeir. Who are the 10 rulers? Shein Asara Maimoris Shemehem Nisavu Kol Hadvarim Agash. The 10 rulers is referring to the 10 Maimoris, the 10 statements that God made to create the world. Bereshis Bara Elikim is the first. V'achachma, toiz l'chachem, lishlet u'lishanis es ateva. And this strength, the chachma that gives strength to the chacham, to the wise person, what is that? How is that stronger than the 10 rulers, the 10 Asar Maimoris? Because he has the power to rule and dominate and change nature itself. So the creation of nature needed Gvura, Bereshis Bara Elikim, Asar Maimoris. But then there's something more powerful, Gvura El Yena Yeser, which has the power to, like we learned before, to sweeten and to soften. Now he's using the power to change nature itself, to dominate and change nature itself. Now he's going back to the pasuk. V'zeh Iyan v'gvuresav. This is the Iyan of v'gvuresav. Gvuresav we're talking about now is the second half of the pasuk. The first half was Gvuresecha Yedaberu. That was the Gvura, like we said, that they say that refers to the concealment of creation. And now he's going back to the second half. Le'edia lebnei Adam Gvuresav. So what's Gvuresav, he says? HaKoyach li is bitel hayesh dafke. Dafke bitel hayesh. Till now we were talking about the creation of the yesh. And the creation of the yesh you need the concealment. But bitl hayesh is what you give the idea libnei adam, the aveda of bitl hayesh, to nullify the yesh. Not that the yesh should be in creation. The focus is on the creation of the yesh, and there you need to conceal. Now the focus is on transforming the yesh. Bitl hayesh dafka. V'ayidei zeh nimshach gili erba malchus uliyas gili hamelucha. Remember the second half. Kvoid hadar malchusei. And through this Aveda, Bitla Yesh, Gvuresov, Gvura not from Tzimtzum and concealment, but Gvura from intensity, where you're overpowering the intensity of the Tzimtzum, basically. You're overpowering the Gvura of concealment by revealing, and what does that do? That reveals, Kfeit Adar Malchus, the Gili and Malchus. There should be Gili HaMelucha, a revelation of Gog's kingship. So here's how he's teaching the Pasuk. Let's go back to the old Pasuk. It says, that in order to create existence and malchus, you need to have gvura, tzimtzum, and concealment. That's the process of ma'ayin liyesh. And the ayin is concealed from the yesh. And what's the purpose of it? In order to inform human being what your shlichus is. Your shlichus is gvuresov. The power of that lies within it, the kavanah of it is to reveal bitl hayesh, and through that, kveid hadar malchusay, the gili of malchus in existence, not the concealment. That's how he teaches the pasuk, the two halves.
What's the connection to Chochmah?
Chochmah clearly is bringing in, I guess, the koyach of elikus to transform. It doesn't say explicitly, but it's asada mamoris. I would say Chachma because it's like he says in Tanya, Perek Lamed Hey in the Hagah. It's hulavade ve'en zolose. It's Gili Elikus. That's what I would say. He doesn't say it explicitly. He just says it's higher than. It's higher than the asada mamoris Chachma. I mean, you could say something like this: that the Eibishter created the world. He created the world asada mamoris. It's more Chachma. That's mislabish and malchus. And Matan Teira was Megala Chochma Be'etzem. Teira, Ve'daber Al-Kim Es Kol HaDvarim Ha'ela. And that's the higher Kayach, the higher Gvura. Like Chochma and Bina. The Bina that's Yamalel, that softens. Meichin, basically. Meichin Be'etzem. Not Meichin Be'bil Hamidus.
Yeah. Bina is also coming Chochmah.
Yeah. It's clearly. Basically, you say, what does it say? We say in the Maimer Bar Mitzvah Maimer, but Elam Chesed Yibana, that the world is created with Chesed, with Zah. Because Zah is Midas. Midas relates, it's a relationship. Meichin, he says, is beyond existence. Alpayim Shana Kod Matera Le'elam, is beyond existence. Alpayim is what? Alefcha Chachma, Alefcha Bina. It works well. That's the Vart. So it's higher, it's a Lekus Hechef Havel, basically. Is the Likus that's higher than the world that we are able to bring, and that happens to transform the Gvuras of Zah, which creates Helam and Simsum. So Chachma and Bina, of course, they create the Bitl Hayesh. That's the Vart, yeah. Doesn't say it mamish explicitly, but it's implied.
First, Chochmah is Mampik the Bina, and then it goes until Malchus.
Yeah, and that he said clearly. He said that Malchus also has this koyach, but lechatchila in Malchus it's concealed the koyach hamahava, koyach ein sof. When it's created, creation itself, it's concealed, but through Aveda you reveal that higher level of gvura and koyach. Basically, he's essentially telling us that the gvura and din of Rosh Hashanah is being transformed into something higher. We're going to learn about it shortly. Okay. So it's not finished yet. And this is the inyan of Tkiyah Shefer, of the sounding of the Shefer. I'm sorry, Nigan, have to change the tone. And this is the inyan, that the sounding of the Shefer, L'sakna Kursaya means the tikkun of Malchus. Kursaya is Kisei HaMelech.
Le'askono.
laskona. The tikkun, the repair of the kursaya of the kisei. So he's going to say, what are you repairing? What's broken? What's not complete? One second. Don't we say? What's the lashon? How'd you pronounce laskona? You said.
Yeah.
From the word tikkun. Okay. So what is the word? Here goes like this. Kursaya hu b'chinas hamalchus. Kursaya is Aramaic for kisei, like the kisei hamel, the king's throne. So he says that's the level of malchus. Malchus, the king sitting on his throne. Shebinyona magvuris, like we learned the first part. How is malchus built? Through gvura, tzimtzum. Uliskona kursaya. Now comes the next step. We do something. That's malchus on its own. The creation of existence, yesh ma'ayin, gvura. Uliskona kursaya, the tikkun. By the way, tikkun doesn't only mean repair. Tikkun also means to beautify. So it's not always like you say tikkun and toyu, you say shviras hakelim and the tikkun. Sometimes laskona means to beautify, from the word like tikkunim as in ornaments. So what does this mean? Hu lahamshich b'nus keach v'gvura da'atzmes ein sof lias tikkun hakisei. This is the Aveda, the Sheitchia Shefer is the Aveda, to draw down what's the Keich Gvura of Atzmus Ein Sof. In other words, not the Gvura of concealment, the Gvura of God's intensity of creation, Lias Tikkun HaKisei, to be the repair or the elevation, if you wish, of the Kisei, the throne, Shabibchinas Malchus. That it should be Yegilui. At least taking the kisha b'chinas malchus gili er, that a malchus should be gili er. So to put it in very simple terms, we always identify malchus with the moon. Now we know the moon, after the miyut halavana, after the diminishment of the moon, is subject to concealment, to the point that it completely disappears before Rosh Chodesh, for the new year. That's why actually Rosh Hashanah is called Bakesa. Tikku b'shem v'chedeh Bakesa liyem chagenu Bakesa. Because the moon is concealed. Rosh Hashanah is Rosh Chodesh. Malchus is in a state of complete concealment. Right before Rosh Hashanah. What's the Aveda of Rosh Hashanah? Is to reveal the Koyach Ein Sof, Koyach Atzmus in Malchus. So Malchus can be in a state of concealment, and it can be in a state of revelation. State of concealment is the way when through process of creation is through Helam and Tzimtzum. That's, it says, Lisakno Kursaya, the Aved of Tkir Shefer, is to elevate, to reveal in Malchus the Koyach, the Gvura El Yena, the higher Gvura, the power and intensity of Elikus, of the divine, of Koyach Atzmus.
Tiku b'chodesh Shefer b'keser. The Tkir Shefer is when there is the Keser is revealing.
Yeah.
How is it connected to Shefer?
You just said Tkir Shefer creates the Gili in Kesa.
But the Biur.
One of the Biurim. Okay. Gili Er. Ukamai Kisei
Kavod.
Kveimon Merishin.
The Pasuk.
Yeah. Which means that the throne of the gods, the glorious throne of God, was from the beginning was in heaven or above. So he teaches like this. What does that mean? He says kisei kaved hu b'chinas bina. The first two words, kisei kaved, which means the glorious throne or the throne of honor. That's the level of bina. Shu kisei ela kaved b'chinas chachma. Oh wow! Because bina is a throne to honor, which is the level of chachma. So kisei kaved means the throne to kaved. Kaved is chachma. Kisei is Bina. And what's Morim? B'chinas Keser. So all that, Bina, the Kisei covered, was Morim Merishim, was Morim meaning it was up in Keser. Morim is like a Remamus, above. And what's Merishim? From the beginning, Ein Sof Atzmus HaMaitzil, Shemesham Nimshach LeMalchus, Hanikri Kisei V'hu Mokim Migdashenu. Okay. So he teaches the pasuk like this, all the levels. Kisei covered is Bina, is a throne to Chachma. Morim, referring to the level of Keser, which is higher, of course, than Bina Chachma, like we said, Kedesh HaKadoshim is Bina Chachma Keser. And Merishen is referring to the levels of Elikut.
Oh, okay.
What?
No, Kodesh HaKadoshim is Kesel.
Kedesh HaKadoshim is Bina Chachma and Keser. The Gimel Rishen, look at the top line of the page. I just brought it in here. It doesn't say it explicitly, so you don't have to, it's all right. And what's Merishin? That it's all rooted in Ein Sof Atzmus HaMaitzil, in the infinite Atzmus, the core essence of the emanator, Shemesham Nimshach. From there, it's Nimshach, it extends, it's transmitted to Malchus, which is called the throne, that's the place of our Migdash, of the Beis HaMikdash.
The pasuk said, "Kisei covered Morim Merishain Mokim Migdash, Beis Mikdashenu, the Mokim Migdashenu." That's
Right.
the hamshach of the pasuk.
Okay. He doesn't bring it in the beginning. But so basically, it's like this. That it goes first from the Bina Chachma Keser all the way to the Atzmus, Ein Sof, which from there goes down to Mokim Mikdashenu. That's where Koyach Ein Sof, remember we said, is in Malchus. The only thing in Malchus is concealed. So he's talking here how obviously the process of how we reveal in Malchus the Koyach HaAtzmus Ein Sof, which is through Bina Chachma and Keser. Again, it's very, very brief here. But the idea is pretty clear. I'll explain in a moment. Let me read the next few lines.
And that's Gvoros Memutokos.
It's even higher now. It looks like he's going into the whole.
The channel is Gvoros Memutokos, the Gvor of the Eideshtel.
U'kamei nochin kisecha ma'oz, b'chinas atik. So nochin kisecha ma'oz means your kiseh, your throne, stood from the beginning, very steadfast. So he's teaching that as a level of atik. So atik is keser, good, or even higher than keser. No, it was the kiseh, which is malchus, is rooted all the way up in atik. And this is what we mamshichim, we draw down through the sounding of the shofar. The Isa b'Zoyer Emer, Dafsat Diktes Amar Aleph, it says in Zoyer Emer, Pash Emer, 99a, the shofar Yilo b'chinas Bina. The supernal shofar, the higher shofar is the level of Bina. Vayodei nimshachim b'chinas hagiluyim elyenim hanal. Through Bina is an nimshachim is transmitted these giluyim, these highest giluyim that we just described. Okay. So to sum up briefly, simple English. In the language of Yesh Ayin, I mentioned before with Tzadikim, in the creative process, it's Ayin to Yesh. Ayin is the level of Malchus, more or less, in this context. It's concealed from the Yesh. The kavanah of it is to be mevatel the Yesh to Ayin, bitl hayesh. So the pasuk where we say, Kved malchuscha yemeru, kv'resechi yudaberu, is the creative process, creation of the existence. The second half, la'idiyah lebnei adam, is the aveda process, mamata lamayla. So basically, that we are transforming and revealing the koyach of gvura elyena in malchus and in the yesh. So the step that's the general gist of it. So we reveal kved hadar malchusei, through this aved of bitl hayesh. The actual process works like this. Creation, we know, comes from koyach ha'atzmos, but it went through a process, through oyer, through keser, through chachma, through bina, through zah, to malchus, and then you have malchus activating that creation, yesh ma'ayin. That's mamayil lamata, from the top down. It went through all those levels. In order to transform and to elevate it and to reveal Elokus in the yesh, the ayin in the yesh, we reverse the process. We invoke shefer. Shefer does it. Shefer is bina. Bina has the power to introduce a gvura al-yena yeser, a higher gvura, which is not defined by concealment. It's defined by intensity, by strength. And that bina softens and sweetens the gvura of malchus, meaning the pure tzimtzum and concealment. All this is what Shefer accomplishes on Rosh Hashanah. But now he went even further. What does Bina do with it? Bina is, or rather put, where does Bina get the strength from? So Bina is a kisei, is a throne to Chochmah, which in turn is rooted in Moreim and Keser, which in turn is rooted all the way in Keich Atzmus Ein Sof, a Maitzil, which is either Atik or even higher. And you draw that down. What does Bina do? Draws it down to the Kisei that is Malchus. Now I know you could say, is Bina a throne or is Malchus a throne? So clearly there's two thrones here, two levels of throne. Bina is a Kisei to Chochmah. Malchus is a Kisei in general to Malchus of Elokus. So what you're doing is, through Bina, you're drawing down these levels into Malchus, and now Malchus is revealing Elokus instead of concealing it. And that's the Gili HaMalchus that we achieve on Rosh Hashanah through Tkiyah Shefer.
Interesting, the Lashon HaBrocha is shekoicho yu gvurasoi.
Okay.
He's not explaining what's the connection to shofar. Why shofar? This is not explaining.
He just says Shefer is the level of Bina. But he may explain it now, in the end of the mimer here. Well, look, Shefer is Bameh Shefer, right? Imru lefane Malchias, K'dei shatamlichuni aleichem. The point of Rosh Hashanah is to renew the Gili of Malchus, because Chassidus explains everything goes back to its source. So it's concealment. That's why it's a new moon. You don't see anything. No Gili by Kesa. Concealed. That's why Reish Hashanah vad Achar Shana, the Alter Rebbe explains in the Geras Kedesh 14, Reish is missing an aleph. Why is it missing an aleph? Because the aleph, the Gilui, is missing. And we have to fill it. When it comes Rosh Hashanah, the Aveda Va'id says in the Geras Kedesh, through the Tfilis and the Tkiyah Shefer, is we drawing it all back down again, but this time it should be revealed, not concealed. That's why there's Aveda. To reveal the Ratzon HaMelucha, Ratzon of Ano Emlech. If you want to use the language we used in Tzadik Dalet and earlier in Ayin Beis, is to reignite, so to speak, God's desire from a place that was higher than desire. He didn't have Ratzon Ano Emlech. The desire for kingship was expired, so to speak. It went back to its source. We want to draw it back down from Ir Atzmi to Ratzon Kloli, Heskim, Shakavitaria, Achlota, to Ratzon Prati, to the Ratzon Hakodum, where Shir Atzmei B'Kayach, and God envisions, and then to the Tzimtzum, and bring it all back down into to this world. That this world should not be in a state of concealment, but in a state of revelation. So Rosh Hashanah is the beginning of the year. It's the beginning of the process of revealing. Now, in other places it says, why Shefer? Because Shefer has the power to pierce. In Siddur, he explains that the Shefer is the most simplest sound. It goes all the way to the Etzem, to the Aleph. That's why the Aleph, every letter starts like with an Aleph. It's the simplest Kel Poshet. So it goes all the way to the Etzem and draws back down Elokus through all these levels. So of course it connects with this. Here, the focus is mostly on Malchus and Gvura and Bina because he wants to talk about Yesh and Ayin. But obviously this same thing can be applied through Holy Shtalshlus, which he does say here. Bina, Chachma, Keser, Atik, and all the way to Atzmus Ein Sof. So clearly this is Rosh Hashanah material. But he connected to Yesh and Ayin that we've been learning.
He's
That's
talking about
that's
Atzmus, right? Not Oyer Ein Sof. Here is Atzmus.
Atzmus means many things. It could be Atzmus ha'oyer, Atzmus ha'maitzi.
No, but here is higher than this. I think that you explain it in such a way that reaching.
Let's put it this way. It's all relative how you understand what Atzmus means. But okay. So the only thing, what else did I want to say? Oh, the only thing I want to say is he also very bekitzer, but he basically hinted to Matan Torah is also 20. So koyach has koyach in Bereshis is koyach, which also he said has two elements. It's concealed, or koyach as in intensity, the power of creation. By Matan Torah, by Daber Elikim, Chav Chesesis is clearly gilui. And he uses the expression nature and governing and dominating over nature, going beyond nature. He added that into this whole equation as well. But it's the same idea. Nature is concealed ayin in the yesh. And gili ayin to the yesh is so-called overpowering the concealment and bringing in a higher level of gili. Okay. Does anybody have any questions? So I would stop here. Tomorrow we'll just continue the end of the mimer, which is going to be what's unique here, but this is not uncommon. In a Rosh Hashanah mimer, usually the Rebbe Rashab reserves the connection to the time and the Dibra Maskell, the beginning of the mimer, to the end paragraph. But often the Rosh Hashanah mimer, which began a new series, you see here, he already begins talking about it even in the actual mimer itself. Now, he may have written this later, which is very possible, but he writes it before he comes to answer the questions. So tomorrow we'll finish the mimer and answer the questions. And you know what we're going to do after that? We're going to go back to Tzadik Daled. But I have to say, Tzadik Daled in this case doesn't add very much, only a few short lines. But since we've been doing it, I think we should continue, and we'll just add those lines. We'll read it quickly, and then we'll go back to Ayin Beis. That will be the Seder HaDvarim here. Okay, so we finished the paragraph here on page 1153. So in case all your kavanos of Rosh Hashanah were not complete, now you have the picture has been filled in.
I think that when V'yeda Kol Kol on Rosh Hashanah